In the second part of my commentary and analysis of Act 1, we pick up just before Mason makes his second entrance on page 16 of the Heinemann Educational Books edition. The mood just before he returns, if you remember, has taken on an almost quiet and philosophical feel, as Osborne suggests to Raleigh that he should adopt the coping mechanism of always thinking of it all as romantic. It helps. Mason's arrival as he comes in with more dinner utensils abruptly changes this dynamic, epitomising as he does everything that is practical and mundane. Do you expect the captain soon, sir? The soup's hot. The ensuing interaction, which juxtaposes the poignancy of Osborne and Raleigh's final words with what is, to all intents and purposes, a serious conversation between Mason and Osborne, revolving around what we, as the audience, would consider to be a trivial mix-up between a tin of pineapple chunks and a tin of apricots at the army canteen, creates a moment of intentional bathos. This serves to remind the audience of how the men were living a life of extremes, with the threat of death constantly hanging over them, while simultaneously having long periods of nothing to do but wait. You might be tempted to think, how could you even think of food at a time like this? But these extended periods of tense tedium gave the men ample opportunity to fixate on domestic details which gave them an exaggerated importance. Mason introduces the topic with the somewhat dramatic, "I've had rather a unpleasant surprise, sir." The extent to which Osborne is merely humouring Mason is unclear, as he responds to his news that there will be apricots rather than pineapple for pudding with, "Good heavens, must have given you a turn." It becomes clear, however, that Mason has good reason to be worried as he reveals, "You see, sir, I know the captain can't stand the sight of apricots. He said next time we had 'em he'd wring my neck." As we come to expect, Osborne is the approachable, unifying influence, otherwise known as Uncle, to whom the men come at times of difficulty, who calmly navigates the trying conditions they are forced to endure, and who endeavours to come up with a workable solution. Haven't you anything else? When Mason responds that there is only a pink blancmange that hasn't yet set, Osborne stoically replies, "Never mind, we must have the apricots and chance it." This seemingly overly dramatic exchange not only changes the pace and provides a moment of light relief, but also gives us further evidence of Stanhope's quick outbursts of temper and his threats of physical violence, as well as of the important role that food, even the uninspiring rations they were forced to consume, played in the men's lives down in the trenches. Sheriff explores this in greater depth later in the scene as the men sit down to supper. The voices heard in the trenches above, signalling Stanhope's imminent arrival, are enough to send Mason scurrying off the stage. The much talked about man finally enters, and we are about to see for ourselves how he lives up to the image that has been painted of him by others. Sheriff describes Stanhope in the stage directions as being, despite his stars of rank, no more than a boy, tall, slimly built, but broad-shouldered. The way Sheriff is at pains to describe how his dark hair is carefully brushed, and his uniform, though old and war-stained, is well cut and cared for, confirms that high standards, even in these extreme conditions, are of the utmost importance to him. He's accompanied by Second Lieutenant Trotter, of whose physical appearance Sheriff also gives a very detailed description. He's middle-aged and homely-looking. His face is red, fat and round. Apparently he has put on weight during his war service, for his tunic appears to be on the verge of bursting at the waist. Note how Sheriff goes out of his way to make Trotter's age, physique and the state of his uniform a stark contrast to those of Stanhope, in order to enhance Stanhope's key features. Note also, when Trotter starts to speak, that Sheriff makes a point of communicating that he is of a similar social class to Mason, the company cook, which suggests that he's worked his way up through the ranks to become an officer rather than having been parachuted in like the young and upper-class Raleigh. The high standards apparent in Stanhope's appearance are reinforced by his very first utterances. "I had a few words to say to Master Hardy. You never saw the blasted mess those fellows left the trenches in. Dugouts smell like cesspits, rusty bombs, damp rifle grenades. It's perfectly foul." He also lives up to his reputation as a hard drinker, as, oblivious to Raleigh's presence, he rejects Mason's food in favour of alcohol. "Damn the soup, bring some whiskey." Osborne is clearly engaged in damage limitation, as he is quick to warn Stanhope that a new officer has just arrived. The moment the audience has been anticipating since Raleigh dropped his bombshell has come. Stanhope stares at Raleigh as though dazed. The atmosphere is now so tense that it can almost be felt. Even Raleigh seems aware of it as he takes a step forward, half raises his hand, then lets it drop to his side. Stanhope is clearly in shock. Note that the authority with which he spoke before has disappeared as he now speaks in a low voice and is hesitant, as indicated by the dash. "How did you get here?" This awkwardness continues until Osborne, ever the mediator, quickly steps in to try to distract Stanhope and break the tension. "I say, Stanhope, it's a terrible business. We thought we'd got a tin of pineapple chunks. It turns out to be apricots." Dinner begins, but the undercurrent of tension remains. Stanhope speaks with sudden forced gaiety as he instructs Osborne and Raleigh to go to the table. Once more there is light relief in the form of a discussion about the quality of the food, as Osborne asks, "What kind of soup is this, Mason?" The way in which Mason can only answer that it's yellow soup, sir, and Osborne's mock serious response that it's got a very deep yellow flavour, suggests the mediocrity of the rations and lack of fresh food that the men had to suffer in the trenches. The incident over the missing pepper and how it's such a big deal to all the men, albeit for different reasons, is interesting. For Osborne, it's because it is a disinfectant, while for Stanhope, it's because Mason's forgetting of it is indicative of a dropping of the high standards he expects of all the men, and is an opportunity for him to regain some of the authority he perhaps feels he has lost after the shock of being confronted by Raleigh. Note the quietly menacing tone in his voice as he says, "Then I advise you never to leave it to anyone else again, unless you want to rejoin your platoon out there." He points into the moonlit trench. It's Trotter's response, however, heavily laced as it is with understatement, that is perhaps the most revealing of the stoic attitude, or stiff upper lip, adopted by the majority of the men. I mean, after all, war's bad enough with pepper, noisy sip. But war without pepper, it's bloody awful. Sheriff's criticism of the conduct of the war is subtly revealed as Osborne remarks, "I wish we knew more of what's going on." Trotter's almost throwaway response, "So do I. Still, my wife reads the papers every morning and writes and tells me." Seems to be a jibe directed at those in power at the time, who kept the British public at home more up to date about what was happening around them than the men themselves, who seem to have been kept in the dark, either through incompetency or design. The interaction between Trotter and Mason over the cutlet provides a moment of humour. As we've previously noted, Trotter is of a similar social class to Mason, and as such uses wordplay to make a much more pointed commentary about the quality of the food. "Sort of cutlet, is it? You know, Mason, there's cutlets and cutlets. I know, sir. That one's a cutlet. Well, it won't let me cut it. No, sir. That's a joke. Oh, right, sir. Note how Mason deliberately refuses to rise to Trotter's jibes at his expense about the toughness of the cutlet, and how he responds in a deadpan manner as though he doesn't understand his sarcasm. This pretending to take Trotter seriously effectively makes the joke backfire, as Trotter does not get the reaction he expects. The conversation turns once more to the subject of time, as Trotter calculates how long the men are to be down in this trench. Well, boys, here we are for 6 days again. 6 bloomin' eternal days. He makes a calculation on the table. That's 144 hours, 8,640 minutes. That doesn't sound so bad. We've done 20 of them already. I've got an idea. I'm going to draw 144 little circles on a bit of paper, and every hour I'm going to black one in. That'll make the time go all right. Not only does the way in which Trotter goes to great pains to calculate how long they will be down there to the very minute communicate the tedium of their lives, and the way in which they come up with inventive ways to make the time pass, but it also provides a moment of dramatic irony and pathos, where the audience, with the benefit of hindsight, know that the attack will happen right in the middle of their time there, and that Trotter's little chart is destined to remain incomplete. After an exchange in which Stanhope orders Trotter to go up to the trench and relieve Officer Hibbert, in which we incidentally learn that inequalities in social class perhaps led to differential treatment even amongst the officers themselves, as Trotter says, "I never knew anything like a war for upsetting meals. I'm always down for duty in the middle of one." And Trotter prepares Raleigh for his first ever time in the trench. The two exit, momentarily leaving Stanhope and Osborne alone for the very first time, if only for seconds. It's during this very brief exchange that Sheriff not only dissolves the tension, but also shows us the mutual bond that exists between the pair, as Osborne, living up to his nickname Uncle, tries to get Stanhope to take the better bed, while Stanhope, equally, and in contrast to Hardy, tries to get Osborne, as his elder, even though his inferior in rank, to take it. Sheriff doesn't allow this moment of calm to last for long, however, and the tension begins to ramp up again as Officer Hibbert enters. He's described as a small, slightly built man in his early 20s, with a little moustache and a pallid face. We learn very quickly that Hibbert is clearly laying the groundwork to be sent home. In response to Stanhope's remark that Mason's got his supper, he says as he gently rubs his forehead, "I don't think I can manage any supper tonight, Stanhope. It's this beastly neuralgia. It seems to be right inside this eye. The beastly pain gets worse every day." Note how Stanhope refuses to really engage with him about it, his responses getting more brusque as Hibbert's excuses persist. "Some hot soup and a good tough chop'll put that right." "I'm afraid the pain rather takes my appetite away. I'm damn sorry to keep on talking about it, Stanhope, only I thought you'd wonder why I don't eat anything much." "Try and forget about it." "Well, I wish I could." "Get tight." Hibbert exits, leaving Stanhope and Osborne alone once more. Stanhope's verdict on Hibbert is damning. Another little worm trying to wriggle home. Describing his words and actions as pure bloody funk, that's all. He could eat if he wanted to. He's starving himself purposely. Artful little swine. Neuralgia's a splendid idea. No proof as far as I can see. He has little sympathy for him and is sceptical of his claims of neuralgia, or nerve pain, all too ready to see him as a malingering coward. Once more we see that the high standards that he sets himself, he also stubbornly expects from his men. Osborne is a lot more human in his response, though, as he defends him. You can't help feeling sorry for him. I think he's tried hard. Stanhope is not to be placated, however, and we learn that the reason for his hard-line stance towards Hibbert is not only because he feels angry at being tricked before, I let Warren get away like that, but no more, but also that he has notions of honour and duty running through him like a stick of rock. No man's going sick before the attack. They're going to take an equal chance, together. Once more, Sheriff is laying the groundwork for more tension later in the play, as it's clear that this problem is not going to go away, and that, more likely than not, there will be a confrontation between the two officers. Rather than respond to this, Osborne instead chooses to address the elephant in the room head on, with the simple observation, "Raleigh looks a nice chap." Stanhope is immediately suspicious of Osborne's intentions as he looks hard at him before replying, "Yes." Note how, in this lengthy exchange between Stanhope and Osborne, Sheriff finally allows the human side of Stanhope to be revealed, and our sympathy for him grows as we begin to see the man behind the mask and understand why he is the way he is. His preoccupations are gradually drawn out of him as, first, he admits that he knows he is Raleigh's hero and is concerned that this idealistic view of him will be shattered. He refuses to be reassured by Osborne that hero worship often goes on all through life, and instead, in a moment of dramatic irony, switches his attention to what he perceives as the incredible odds against Raleigh having been detailed to his company in the first place. "There are 1,800 companies in France, Uncle. Raleigh might have been sent to any one of those, and my God, he comes to mine." Of course, Osborne and the audience know that Raleigh has contrived to be sent there. Yet another layer is then peeled away as Stanhope reveals the real reason that Raleigh's arrival has upset him so much. He takes a worn leather case from his breast pocket and hands a small photograph to Osborne. "I've never shown you that, have I?" It's a photograph of Raleigh's sister, Madge, with whom he's in love. The photograph he has kept, even though he believes he will never be able to be with her. When Osborne remarks, "Well, I thought that perhaps she was waiting for you," he responds, "Yes, she is waiting for me, and she doesn't know. She thinks I'm a wonderful chap, commanding a company." He turns to Osborne and points up the steps into the line. "She doesn't know that if I went up those steps into the front line, without being doped with whiskey, I'd go mad with fright." Stanhope's internal conflict and sense of self-loathing, arising from the belief that it is his own weakness of character, rather than the horror of the situation, that is to blame, are clear in these lines. He feels as though he is stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, he has an unswerving sense of honour and duty which demands he stick it out, rather than be like Hibbert, that little worm in there, neuralgia in the eye. But on the other, the only way he can do that is to be in a permanent drunken haze, a state of affairs which he finds almost equally loathsome. He's fully aware that he is a dead man walking, and seems to grimly and fatalistically accept that his days are probably numbered. "It's all right, Uncle, I'll stick it out now. It may not be much longer now. I've had my share of luck. More than my share. There's not a man left who was here when I came. But it's rather damnable for that boy, of all the boys in the world, to have come to me. I might at least have been spared that." In the next section of the scene, Stanhope speaks in detail about how he got to know Raleigh and his sister through staying with the family during school holidays. He enjoyed looking after him and making him keen on the right things and all that. And it is at that time, of course, when he got to know his sister. He reveals that he only realised what a topping girl she was just before he was sent out to France for the first time, and how he just prayed to come through the war and to do things and keep absolutely fit for her. Note how Stanhope, as he starts to talk about why he started to drink, takes another whiskey, which he consumes as he speaks. indicating how difficult he finds it to open up about the trauma he has so obviously suffered. It was all right at first. When I went home on leave after 6 months, it was jolly fine to feel I'd done a little to make her pleased. He takes a gulp of his drink. It was after I came back here, in that awful affair on Vimy Ridge. I knew I'd go mad if I didn't break the strain. I couldn't bear being fully conscious all the time. You've felt that, Uncle, haven't you? It's interesting to observe how Stanhope, as well as other characters, use a lot of euphemism in their speech to enable them to speak of the trauma they both witnessed and suffered by understating it. Vimy Ridge was a 4-day battle in northeastern France, in which the British were involved as support units to the Canadian Army, and which was well known for its high number of casualties. And yet Stanhope just refers to it as that awful affair. Likewise, his near mental collapse is characterised merely as strain. Stanhope and Osborne's attitudes towards the psychological impact of war reflect common attitudes of the time. Early understanding of shell shock, what we now know of as PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, was that it was induced by physical injury to the nerves. Doctors increasingly realised, however, that it had a psychological basis and that even witnessing terrible events was enough to trigger it. This understanding was not, however, accompanied by sympathy, as it was perceived as an emotional weakness or cowardice. Note that Stanhope refers to it as pretending to be ill, and that it's a slimy thing to go home if you're not really ill. Osborne tries to reassure Stanhope that when the war's over and the strain's gone, you'll soon be as fit as ever. Yes, concedes Stanhope, but what stands in his way now is Raleigh, and the fact that he'll write and tell his sister I reek of whisky all day. Although Osborne tries to reassure him that Raleigh won't do this because he'll come to realise that men are different out here, Stanhope remains unconvinced, paranoid that over supper Raleigh was staring at me and wondering. He's up in those trenches now, still wondering and beginning to understand. It's at this point that we realise just how drunk Stanhope has become. He rejects Osborne's assertion that Riley will go on liking you and looking up to you through everything, as there's something very deep and rather fine about hero worship. With the expletive, hero worship be damned. Note how his voice changes to being strange and high-pitched, as he calls Raleigh a bloody little prig of a boy, and threatens to abuse his powers of censorship to cross out all he says about me. Then we all go west in the big attack, and she goes on thinking I'm a fine fellow for ever and ever and ever. He pours out a drink, murmuring ever and ever and ever. Note also how his words become more and more slurred. Go sleep yourself, as Osborne attempts to get him to go to bed, until he begins to talk nonsense. Dear old uncle, clean trenches up, with little dustpan and brush, he laughs. Make your little apron, with lace on it. And then seems to regress to an almost childlike state. Tuck me up. Kiss me, uncle. The way Osborne then very matter-of-factly summons Mason and gives him orders about when he wishes to be called to go on duty suggests that Stanhope's behaviour and Osborne's managing of it have become routine. Just before the curtain falls on the end of this first act, through the stillness comes the rumble of distant guns, ominously reminding the audience of the imminence of the attack. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos on English language topics and exam techniques and English literature texts.